Welcome everyone. This is a new and a restarting of our ICJ series on what's been the impact and what is the impact of the measures against COVID-19 on the human rights and rule of law everywhere. Today, I'm really grateful to be joined by Tara Aziz, who's a human rights lawyer from Sweden. And today we are gonna actually delve and explore into the COVID-19 impact in one of the countries that's been over the news globally for a long time, Sweden, a country that in Europe chose a different approach. And therefore, it's going to be interesting also in terms of the comparative to aspect to all the other assessments we have done. So we are very grateful to have really an expert that knows what's going on in Sweden, in practice and in law. Welcome to our talks, Tara.
Thank you, dear Massimo, for inviting me to a talk.
You're welcome. Just to the viewers, there is a bit of delay in our sound, so don't worry if there are some pauses. This is really a normal technical issue.
Hello?
Sorry, apologies to everyone. There has been a technical mistake, actually. This is what happens when it goes live. I've been kicked out slowly from the room, but we are back here with Tara Aziz. Apologies to all the viewers. You've seen an accident. I think we can actually start right now to actually understand what's the situation in Sweden and in terms of COVID-19, what's going on in the country, because all over Europe it's a bit we start to be a bit afraid again. And so what's going on in Sweden, Tara?
Thank you, Massimo. First, I just want to say that I'm not an epidemiologist and I'm not an expert on different strategies, just to be clear. But I will do my best to contribute to the legal discussion and to give you a fair picture of the situation in Sweden. During the spring, the Swedish government presented a number of measures to stop the spread of the virus and to mitigate the economic effects on society. We had a very high number of deaths during the first months of the pandemic. Elderly make up 90% of the total number of deaths linked to COVID-19. And of the people who died, 50% of them lived in special care housings. So obviously, we've failed protecting our elderly, and the Public Health Agency have admitted that we should have had stricter measures within certain sectors of society. And also the processes for guaranteeing protective equipment was too slow in the beginning of the pandemic. We have also seen that some socio-economically disadvantaged areas have had a particular high spread of the virus, especially in the initial phase of the outbreak. And also, I just want to add that I think many see Sweden as a country that has adopted a singular approach that is maybe different from everybody else's, and that is maybe modeled on our own views in Sweden. And it is controversial and often referred to as a strategy of herd immunity. But the Swedish strategy has focused on flattening the curve, and in order to not to overburden the healthcare system. Sorry. And as you may know already, we did not have a national lockdown in Sweden. And one of the reasons is that we simply cannot do that according to our constitution. This means that the Swedish parliament has to give the government, we don't have state of emergency, and it's not possible for the government to proclaim during peacetime. So this means that the Swedish government, or the Swedish parliament, has to give the government additional powers, as opposed to other countries and our neighboring countries where the government can on its own declare a state of emergency. So this is not possible in Sweden during peacetime, according to our constitution. So also the Swedish strategy is based on the Swedish Communicable Diseases Act. And the act gives citizens freedom to decide about their own lives, but also expect citizens to take responsibility. And of course, infected persons must follow certain rules of conduct in order to prevent from infecting others. So the strategy is based on recommendations of social distancing and on avoiding general transportation and working from home if that is possible. So these are not binding restrictions. The responsibility lies with the people. And if we look at the situation right now in Sweden, it is okay at the moment. But the Public Health Agency have been warning in recent days that we are maybe facing a sort of a second spike. But this is something that they have expected all along. So in big urban areas, we're starting to see an upswing. And to be honest, people are a little bit more relaxed right now, unfortunately, but the Public Health Agency are repeating the same things about recommendations that they did during the spring. If we somehow look at the outcome of the Swedish strategy, even though it may be too early to judge which strategy has worked the best, the fact that the pandemic harvested so many lives in Sweden is a matter of great concern. And according to statistics, age has been an important factor, but also social, geographic, and economic background. So, of course, there is a need to evaluate if the loss of lives in reality also is a violation of the right to life. And if the Swedish strategy has somehow neglected or failed to protect the right to life and the right to health for some affected individuals or groups, particular elderly and the socially and economically disadvantaged. But also I want to mention if structural discrimination in society has directly or indirectly affected everyone's right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of access to health.
So I can see that basically there have been a lot of talk European about associating Sweden to herd immunity. But that's, yes, actually the strategy by Sweden has been more complex than that, and has been much more trying to relying on the civic duty of people and on the behavior of people. Actually resembles quite a bit the one we are seeing in Switzerland.
Exactly.
In the meantime, with the difference of the closing of the schools. Yes. So that's actually very interesting, and it's very interesting the reflections you're doing. I wanted to ask you a bit more. Instance, I'm very interested in what you were mentioning about the measures or the incapacity to introduce measures on COVID-19 from a legal point of view. Can you explain a bit that, why and how that's happened, why you can't do it?
Of course. So just want to start with that a majority of the economy recovery measures made by the government during the corona outbreak have aimed to help businesses and prevent unemployment. So that is a good thing. The measures in every sector of society are somehow, as I told you, based on recommendations. And another measure that has been done, for example, is that the Swedish government scrapped its unpaid forced day of sick leave. So this enables people to stay at home without worrying too much about loss of incomes. That's also a very good measure from the government. And one more thing that I want to add is that the government has also increased funding for organizations working for elder people in order to prevent isolation. And also I mentioned our constitution, and the idea and maybe the benefit of the Swedish approach is that the state and agency are giving limited powers in separate areas and separate laws. So the idea is that each separate law should contain clauses which may be used for emergency situations. In other words, I would say that Sweden has chosen more rule of law approach as to an approach where the government may be totally unrestrained in time of crisis and maybe use their powers in a bad way. But also we have a restriction on gatherings at the moment, maximum 50 people.
Okay, that's actually very interesting. But in this moment, actually, the restriction on gatherings seems to be stricter than in Switzerland because we.
Sorry, the connection is bad. It's bad again, but.
Don't worry. No.
Okay.
The message actually is going through. It's very clear what you said, and it's actually interesting the restriction in gathering now seems even to be stricter than in other countries, actually, because 50 people.
Yes.
In other countries now we are at 300 people. And there are discussions even in Italy to open the stadiums and to open big manifestations. So actually it's interesting to see how much the Swedish model was actually misinformed in the way it was perceived during spring. And that brings me actually to the third question I have for you, which you mentioned already, but I want to go deeper there. It has happened in every country that in the end, we see disadvantaged groups have been the one that have been left behind, have been the ones that actually have been mostly affected. For instance, I live in Switzerland. We have seen lines of people asking for food, and Switzerland suddenly discovered that they have a poverty issue, which they always had. What's been the impact of COVID-19 on the marginalized group in Sweden, and has the government done, or the institution done enough for that or not?
Thank you, Massimo. This is a very important questions, and a question I can go on and on about it, but I will keep it short. Information on the COVID-19 was initially not made available to people with hearing and visual problems, or people who did not fully understand Swedish. So this is a problem. And generally, little systematic monitoring of human rights enjoyment is done in Sweden as a response to the COVID-19. As of today, no human rights assessment has been done openly or directly. And Sweden, I need to mention this as well, has still not established a national human rights institute under the Paris principles. And it's moving very slow, I think. It was in January 2015 that the Human Rights Council of the UN recommended Sweden to establish an independent national human rights institution. The Swedish government accepted this recommendation and announced that they will establish it, but so far it's going too slow. And as I mentioned earlier, support packages from the state have been directed to people risking losing their employment. So if we look at the impact on human rights, I try to sum it up. It is the fact that persons with disabilities are overrepresented in statistics compared to the population at large. And many people with disabilities belonging to a risk group have not been able to isolate themselves completely. And also sexual and gender-based violence increases during emergency. And this pandemic is not an exception, unfortunately. We see in Sweden that victims of honor-related violence are at greater risk due to limited social contact and stay-at-home restrictions. So this shuts down for the victim or the survivor their already limited opportunities to ask for help or to be recognized and helped by friends and professionals. So this is, of course, alarming. Women and girls shelters in Sweden that are specialized in honor-related violence have seen an increase in threats of child and forced marriages in Sweden. We can see the consequences of self-isolation if we look at the number of reported cases of domestic violence against women. For example, in Sweden, in March 2020, 194 cases of domestic violence against women were reported compared to 124 cases last year in March. So this is, of course, alarming. And also there is another aspect that needs to be mentioned. In Sweden, healthcare is mainly funded by the government, but there has been a long existing gap in overall health between those living in vulnerable neighborhoods and the rest of the Swedish population, especially in Stockholm. And this has been the situation also before the current pandemic. The differences in life expectancy are larger between the Stockholm's wealthiest areas and the poorer neighborhood. In some areas, the gaps are as large as 18 years. So according to our public health agency, there are several factors that may impact the risk of catching the virus, such as crowded housing, low wages, intergenerational living, working in jobs that requires social contact, and structural factors such as access to healthcare. So the situation has definitely been hard on people living in vulnerable neighborhoods in Sweden. I know that we have limited time, but in the end, I just want to add that social and economic inequality increases in the aftermath of the pandemic. All measures taken by the Swedish government originate in protecting the right to life. However, we've seen that the methods have affected certain groups more than others, and this needs to be investigated and taken seriously by the Swedish government. And I also need to add that the government have allocated some of the money presented in the Spring Policy Bill to organizations and civil society working for women's rights and children's rights. And I know that many organizations and civil society are struggling financially, and I really hope that the government and agency will pay attention to that.
Thank you very much. This is very complete. And actually, I must say, I've learned a lot in this talk. A lot of things I didn't know about how Sweden actually is handling this and what's the impact. There is a confirmation of what we hear all along that we heard from Serbia, from Kyrgyzstan to Switzerland, Italy, and Serbia, the fact that this crisis has revealed how economic social rights are central to the right to life, are central to our societies, and now is the time for people to actually enter into that. And hopefully Sweden is more prepared than others to do it on that side, hopefully. At least. I don't know, usually we went through the topics of these talks very clearly. I don't know if there is anything more you would like to add.
No, I don't think so. Just thank you so much for inviting me. And yes, thank you for the followers and the viewers for listening. It was really fun to participate.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I mean, we're going to come back because, in a sense, we try every 6 months or to actually repeat the countries to see what's the situation there. But it was really essential to have also Sweden in the picture because really it has been at the forefront of everything. And I must say, from my side, after this talk, I will read differently the news and I will understand differently the news because I will see actually what really has been the impact in the good and in the bad in Sweden. And I think that's a lesson for everyone. Thank you very much, Tara. It's been a great pleasure. And I hope you can join us again for the next time.
Thank you, dear Massimo. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.